Hello everybody. This video is going to be on the last couple intro exit tickets, but really it's going to be on some extra material that I find interesting about teacher evaluation and the Gates MET study. Also the PA evaluation system that's coming up next year for many of you. Alright, but first on the intro exit tickets, the only thing I really want to say is that some of the most helpful things you're going to find in those last couple exit tickets were some of the answers from your peers. So what I did was I picked out the quotes that I found to be the most straightforward, the best explanations, and put them all in one post and left them at the top of each of the last two discussion periods. So I really invite you to go back to those forums and look at those top posts to see what the quotes that were picked out to represent some really nice, easy to understand explanations of some very abstract concepts. So the link should be right underneath this video for you to get to really easy. Alright, what I want to do really with this video is talk about the Gates MET study. Bill Gates financed the study, and one of the reasons that I'm a fan of this study is that it's so comprehensive. You may have found in the topics that you've been looking at that many of the studies were fairly small scale and not very rigorous. Because Bill Gates has a lot of money and because he poured it into this study among other things he's doing, this study was very large scale and very comprehensive and fairly rigorous. There were 3,000 teachers that participated. Each year that they were in the study, they were observed 4 times with videotape using new technology that captured the students and the teachers. The teachers were rated using multiple different instruments, and then they used those ratings to determine which instrument, Danielson or whatever, was the best. They were all about equal, and Danielson did okay compared to the others. And they collected value-added assessment test score data from the teacher students and tracked that fairly well. They collected other cognitive measures on the students besides our state tests. They did student surveys asking the students about whether their teachers were helping them understand and making them work hard. And those were actually one of the best predictors of good teaching. Unfortunately, we're not using those in Pennsylvania. And they did a whole battery of measures, and then they had some very top-notch people doing analysis. So there are definitely a lot of things about the study that you could argue with, but I liked it because it was so comprehensive, and I just am hungry to see good information that's at least debatable besides purely critiquing the scope of a study. Now, I want to go into a little bit about how they were finding in this study whether or not you could predict whether or not a teacher would be effective with their students. Okay, that's the big question of the study. Can you predict if a teacher will be effective? And then based on that, maybe you could help the teacher learn some new skills or possibly be the basis for a job action. Alright, so they considered a whole bunch of different ways to evaluate teachers, but basically they had observational data using something like Danielson, surveys of students asking about their teachers, and prior test scores of students from that teacher. So in other words, let's say last year my students rocked the PSSAs, then that would mean that I would be predicted to do well with my students this year on the PSSAs. All right? So 3 things. And they tried different ways of weighting those, maybe we should use 50% Danielson, 50% student surveys, etc. All right, so this shows the 4 main ways that they looked at. The first way, they used 81% of the score they gave a teacher was based on that teacher's students' prior test scores. All right? If I did well last year with my students, likely to do well this year. 17% for student surveys and 2% for Danielson. Now, there's various weightings here, but that goes over to this more, what you might consider more balanced model. 50% of the teacher's evaluation based on observation using Danielson, 25% on student surveys, 25% on past test scores. Here's what they found out in terms of which one of those is the best. I'll ask you just to think about that and make your own prediction for now, before I show. All right. So here's how it turned out. The best one is number one, with 81% of the teacher's score being based on how well that teacher's students did last year. And the next best one, also heavily weighted test scores. This is the one with 50% Danielson. Didn't do very good. A 0.43 correlation is modest, and it means there's all kinds of variation where some teachers that score high with Danielson students would not do well, and vice versa. Right? Now, remember, this number 4 still had a good amount of test scores in there and student survey. But I want to look just at Danielson and see how well that did. So this table here shows that. Now there's a lot of information in this table. I've tried to highlight just the key stuff I want to point out. So FFT stands for Danielson, Framework for Effective Teaching, and how it correlates with all these different things they did in the study. SVA stands for State Value Added Scores, PSSA in other words. Of course, it wasn't done in Pennsylvania. Actually, it was in Pittsburgh, but whatever the state test score was. All right. The correlation, the bottom number is the statistical significance of the correlation. The top number is the correlation. For Danielson, there was a 0.28 correlation with elementary math scores. Very weak. For English language arts, it was 0.41. A little bit better, but still weak. Move up to the middle level. The relationship between Danielson and state value added scores, 0.17. Very weak. So really what's going on here is, when you look at this mix, the reason that Model 1 is so much stronger than Model 4 is that the Danielson part of the mix really isn't adding a lot. And here's why I find that so interesting. It's that Danielson, to me, represents accumulation of all we know about good teaching. Just about anything that you might be reading about in your studies is somehow represented about teaching, is represented in some way in Danielson. So this is like the synthesis of everything we know. And by the way, in this study, when they used Danielson or other frameworks, they were able to establish pretty good inter-rater reliability. So a teacher who is rated highly by one person under Danielson is rated highly by another person under Danielson. So it's not about using the instrument, it's about what the instrument actually says and how we can see that in teaching. So we take everything we know about good teaching, and it does predict student achievement, but not very strongly. What predicts student achievement better is a teacher's past success with student achievement. But of course, then we still don't know why. We just know that some teachers do consistently better with students than other teachers when it comes to student achievement, and it's for some reason other than Danielson. So I just find that so fascinating. There's this X factor that explains good teaching that is not captured in objective forms of measurement like Danielson. We still don't really know. And so there's an art to teaching that has not yet been captured by the science of research behind educational research. To me, that's just fascinating. And it's one of the reasons I like being in teaching, is because there's so much we still have to learn. And so it's constantly changing, which is frustrating, but it's also exciting. All right, here's maybe the biggest headline from the study is this chart here. They take that best predictor that I described with 81% made up of past success with test scores, and they use that to predict how well a teacher's students will do. So the vertical axis here is actual student achievement, and this is the predicted achievement based on the teacher's combined scores. And you see it's a pretty good fit. When they do those combination of scores and they get this prediction, they're actually able to predict, and it's pretty important. So going back to the practical significance, large scale study, big practical significance here in one way, and that is the distance from here to here is equivalent to approximately what a student would gain in a year's worth of learning. So some students actually, some teacher students, not some students, some teacher students regress, go backwards, and some make good gains. And the difference between the bottom and the top is almost a full year. So that has to be practically significant. That's meaningful. That's big time. But there's two caveats about this. First, each dot represents 5% of the teachers in the study. So this is the lowest 5%, this is the next 5%, this is the next 5%. Right? These are not individual teachers. These are groups of teachers. The bottom 5% are predicted teachers. Right? So the first thing to know is, even though this bottom predicted group, their students did very poorly, there could be some teachers in here whose students did very well, because this is the whole average of all those teachers. And there could be then, if that was true, there would be some students in that group that would even do worse than this. And same up here. There's this really highly predicted group of teachers, and some of their students might do poorly. And all through this you've got that, because each dot represents a whole average, 5% of 3,000 teachers. And within that there's a ton of variation that is completely unexplained. When we average them all together, it starts to look like a good fit. But individually, the reliability is not that good. Second thing to know here is that this middle group here they're not that different, and we really can't make strong distinctions between teachers within the middle 80%, middle 90% even. So there are the outliers at the bottom and the top that we haven't fully explained, because we don't know how to predict good teaching, or effective teaching I should say, other than through past effective teaching. The Danielson instrument provides some explanation, but not a very substantial portion of the explanation. Alright, that was a little bonus material, something that I've been interested in lately. Hope you found it informative as well as you think about what's going to be happening with teacher evaluation in the next year in Pennsylvania.